I'd like to call to order the Committee of a Whole for January 9th. If the clerk could please call the roll.
Councilmember Wood?
Here.
Councilmember Hussein?
Here.
Councilmember Spatafor?
Present.
Councilmember Brown?
Present.
Councilmember Jackson?
Present.
Councilmember Garza?
Here.
Councilmember Spitzley?
Here.
Councilmember Cost?
Here.
8 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. We now have the minutes for Committee of a Whole. Vice President Garza.
Thank you, President. I move the minutes as written for the January 3rd, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting.
All right, we have a motion on the minutes. Are there any questions or concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. This is the opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to make public comment, if you could please come up to the podium, state your name for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Stan Shuck, 818 Cooper Avenue, also known as Route 19. And I want to talk about the disaster that we call chip sealing in the city and what the contractor did. And he needs to be held liable. This is destruction of public property. If you look that up, the way that's done is they lay the tar down, they lay the stones down, they roll it with a wheeled roller, and they sweep it, and then they come back and seal it. No more than a 48-hour process. It says in every informational video you'll ever watch in my 34 years at public service that once the damage is done and the gravel is bounced off and the epoxy is exposed, there is no repair. There's no fixing it. That's like that permanently. What the contractor did is he came in August in Route 19 and he put the 2 layers down, and then he was non-existent. They came back in October. After many calls, I finally spoke with Alec Malvidas. He had the oversight on it. He dictated that down to his assistant, Mark. Mark tried repeatedly to get a hold of this company, out-of-state contractor. Tried repeatedly, emails, phone calls, everything else. They just wouldn't answer anything from the city of Lansing. I'm sure this is a very expensive contract. Finally, they got a hold of them at the end of September, and they came out in the first part of October and started finishing these roads. Because that happened, there is just gravel everywhere. I put a video out there. I've sent you, many of you, videos. You can literally go out in the middle of my road with a flat shovel anywhere on the road, anywhere in the neighborhood, scrape it along the ground and fill a shovel with gravel. It's a hazard to pedestrians. It's a hazard to motorcycle traffic, to bikers. It's being tracked into the driveways, into our homes. What do we do with it? In my gutter pan alone, I swept up 15 gallons in one day. I could probably do that again today. Well, after that happened, they came through with the leaf pushers, and everything that wasn't loose got loose. And I'm going to read this to you, and this is from the equipment operator himself after he watched my video on the city's complaint thing. The road was chip sealed, straight grinder on the leaves, and they didn't have bodies to put someone in a sweeper. I was supposed to finish your route with Terry and a sweeper behind me on days yesterday, but instead they put me in another route. And there it is, right from the horse's mouth. I've called a dozen times. They've put me on hold, they blew me off and blew me off and blew me off, and no one will even come out and have a look at it. This is a disaster. The contractor needs to be held responsible. If he's not going to be responsible, the people who contract him need to be, and that's us, people. We need to clean this up. They're going to blow a little smoke at you, say they can't sweep this time of year because it's too cold. That's an absolute falsehood.
Thank you.
You cannot use water, but you can sweep and vac. Clean it up, do the right thing.
Thank you, Stan. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to address the council at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to our first presentation. We have a presentation from Andy Kilpatrick talking about the 2022 street project update and the 2023 planned street projects. Mr. Kilpatrick, if you take a seat at the desk and then make sure that the green light is on, you know the drill by now.
Right. Thank you, council members, and Council President Wood, for the opportunity to come present to you tonight. I believe I did forward to Sherry kind of an updated list, and if you had that, great. Otherwise, I have extra
Yep.
copies here.
No, I appreciate you printing those off, and we can put those in the back for anyone that would like a copy. Council members, this is date stamped. You received one by email, but this is an updated one that came in this afternoon. So that's what you have in front of you.
Right. So obviously, this is street by street of all the streets we did with the dollar amount. As far as categories, I'll kind of go broadly through them because that's maybe a little easier than trying to pull them together from the list. But the largest project that we had is our CSO 034E project, which is on both sides of MLK, south of Mount Hope, at about $18.1 million. Then after that, large multiple pipes under the river between Moores River and Scott Park, or Morris Park and Scott Park. So you're not really going to know about that, but kind of by GM. And that serves sort of the whole upstream area, the Colonial Village area and the Morris Park area, about $8.7 million. Then on the road projects, the largest one we have is Pennsylvania Avenue at about $2.9 million. And as you know, that one is not complete now. That will be completed in the spring. They will finish up the sidewalk work, curb and gutter, and paving of that, so that will be opened sort of when the plant's open, so hopefully by May-ish that will be done. Then we also had two other major street projects, Miller Road, that was close to $1 million. That one, other than some structures, some drainage structures there that have to be basically sort of cut out with a concrete collar put around that, and that'll be done in the spring. That one is done. And then Waverly, which I'm sure you know, had to be shortened because the bids came in super high the first time, so we shortened the limits on that. That one is also not completed, but it's open to traffic now, and we need to do the final course of asphalt there, and then the sidewalk on the west side. That's about $1.9 million. We had a large project, water main and road project in Alpha Devonshire Trantor area with the Board of Water and Light at about $3 million, and then kind of overall paving and reconstruction at $2 million. River Trail projects, which obviously are not on roads, but that's about $5 million, primarily funded with Ingham County Parks and Trails millage money. Then what we call preservation treatments, so those are shorter duration but more cost effective. The ones that I think we've already heard about, some chip and fog seal with microsurface, and the intent of those is basically to keep the water out of the road base. So just like with a car, if you change your oil and other fluids more regularly, you're not going to have long-term problems. Same thing with this, you want to keep the water out of the pavement. So that's kind of something newer we've been doing. And again, we do not get the life that we would from a repaving or a full reconstruction, but on a per year basis and per mile basis, it's much more cost effective. And then we have resurfacing several streets for $600,000. So that's kind of overall big categories there. I've looked at ways that we can kind of change this table, and so if you have suggestions of how you'd like to see it, we did not do it by area of the city or major versus local street or anything like that, but we do have the data and we can pull that together. And if you'd like to see it in a spreadsheet so you can play with it yourself and sort things, we can definitely do that. But there's probably some other categories we need to add here because this is construction costs, but we have engineering costs. So if you want to look at the entire cost, it would be more than this. And some of these, for example, sewer projects, the CSO has water main in with that, plus the road, plus the sewer. So if you want to see those split out, we can split those costs out, but they're just kind of combined here.
All right, we'll open it up for questions from council members. Do we have questions from council members? I have Vice President Garza and then Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Council President. Good evening, Andy. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you taking the time out of your night to present this. I guess I have a comment, question. I reached out to you back when they were redoing, I believe that you said it was a chip and fog seal for Northrop from Cedar to.
Yes, Northrop and Washington, we're
Yep,
doing
Northrop
that same area.
from Washington
Yep.
to Cedar, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so I asked you if you could send me the information of like the application process. I never received it, but I did look up, like Mr. Shuck said in the audience just recently, the YouTube videos, and they mentioned that, you know, within 48 hours, you should sweep up the gravel. And you told me that if you let the gravel sit, it will get into the cracks, and that's the process. So I guess I'm just trying to see what the exact application process is, because I never received it.
Okay, so apologize for that. But basically, so we have, if you look at rural roads, a lot of times they will do just a chip seal. So that they will put down the asphalt emulsion, put the stone on top of that. In a lot of cases, in those areas, if they do not have curb and gutter, they don't really sweep that much because a lot of it just will go on and become a gravel shoulder. In the city, what we do is we put an extra application of emulsion on top of that. So that's the fog seal. In this case with the contractor, we did not have specifications for when they had to come back and do it. We had a specification by what time in the year they had to finish it. And so in some of these streets, and actually it wasn't as much on the south side, but more on the north side, they pulled off for a number of weeks, and actually probably a month plus before they came back and did that. So in that case, you probably have more stone that leaves the roadway than we would like. And that's something we will write into, you know, our new specification for a maximum amount and a minimum amount, because what we like to see is about a week to 2 weeks to have that stone try and work its way down into the cracks. Then they come sweep, and then they put the seal on top of that. So that's something that we'll, you know, kind of address moving forward.
Just to follow up real quickly on his question, if you're not sweeping it up and it's going in the gutter area, is that not then going into the drains that then has the potential of clogging those up, since we don't suck those out anymore, we don't vacuum those out anymore, so then you're not having water leave the roadway?
So it is the possibility there. So it depends on the rain you get. Just because it gets into the gutter pan does not mean it necessarily gets into the inlets for the storm sewers. But yes, that is a possibility that if it does get flushed out in there, in those storm sewer catch basins, they have a sump of a couple feet below that, which is to catch the debris. So just because it gets into the sewer doesn't mean it gets into the downstream pipes. We still are cleaning those, probably not as frequently as we would like to, just like we're not street sweeping as much as we used to. So there is a greater probability of that. The one good thing about storm sewers versus sanitary sewers or combined is storm sewers in general will flush themselves out more than a sanitary sewer, because you get that, you know, that storm, that rain that comes down, a big surge, it'll flush those debris out. But no, I mean, that is why, honestly, we have not historically done these type of treatments, is because we wanted to try and keep, you know, everything out of the catch basins. And so that's something that we're looking at and trying to make sure that our special provisions or specifications are tighter, so that if a contractor, once they apply this, we don't care necessarily when during the construction season they do that. Once they put down the first coat with the rocks there, the stone, that they have X amount of time before they have to come back and pull that back out. And we've had other cases where we've done that, and we've tried it also on unpaved roads, which it will work, not long term, but if we don't get back in a certain period of time, you'll start to get kind of that washboard effect on that street. And we did have that. I believe it was down on Ruth or Willard, or one of the ones we did it on. And so that's another reason we want to make sure that they come back in more timely fashion.
All right, thank you. I have Councilmember Jackson, then Councilmember Spitzley.
Thank you. Just, I guess it was partially answered, but to follow up on Stan's question and concerns about the timing, you said on the north side that there was like a month or so gap.
Correct.
Would it be safe to say that was the same here on the Cooper Street and around there? And is it I mean, did you guys check it out yourself?
I would have to check with the project engineer on that to see the dates that was applied versus reapplied. I do know that the ones on the north end, specifically between Saginaw and Oakland Grand River area there, those were out for an extended period of time before the contractor came back and did the final fog seal on that. So I can look at dates on specific streets and let you know.
And
on
I
that.
guess the last part is, so if it is 48 hours or so, and they went months or whatever it was, wouldn't that be kind of out of the way that people do it and maybe outside of their contract, if you will?
So right now, we do not or did not have any kind of provision. It has, the amount of application they have to, the temperatures for that, but not a time in between the applications. So that is something that we are writing into our specifications now. So there's basically a minimum, like they can't put it down one day and come back the next day and put the next layer on. But they also can't wait a month to do that. And in that case, then we would have provisions in there that they would have to probably reapply basically a whole nother coat, because you want some of that stone to stay there, and if that's gone, then you're not sealing anything in. You basically are almost like when you seal your driveway, you have 2 coats of that, and you don't get the advantage. So it's probably that they would have to take care of both any stone that would not be on the roadway and may have to do something else for us. So that is something, because of our experience this year, that we are writing specifically into that. Whereas what we had now, we basically had a final completion date for the year that they had to have, which they met, but they had an extended period of time, which is not what we want.
Right, and I'm sorry, but wouldn't there be a best practice?
Oh, definitely.
That the company's aware of, so if they go outside of that, wouldn't it be kind of like their fault also?
Well, yes, but contractually, they're only, whatever we have in writing is what they have to comply with. At that point in time, if they're outside of what we have in writing, we can go after them, but we can't go back and say, well, you didn't do a good job, come back and do it for us. And we can look at that in the future, but not within our current contract.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Councilmember Spitzley, then Councilmember Hussein.
Thank you, President Wood. Thank you, Andy, for coming and giving that update. But I specifically, though, want to, so what recourse does a neighborhood or a citizen have if they're experiencing what Mr. Shuck is experiencing? And do they call you and you guys come and look at it and evaluate whether or not there, this happened and whether there needs to be additional steps taken?
Yeah, I think the best course, so on the Public Service Department's website, where we have our construction project map, on each of those, it actually does have the name of the project engineer. And so that would be the quickest, probably and best way to get in touch with someone that could actually take care of, whatever has to be done with the contractor. And if they're not getting a response there, then I would suggest calling either our office or the operations and maintenance office, or up to the mayor's office or council for someone else. So if,
Well, and I appreciate that. From the testimony, it sounds like he's already done that. And so I'm going to personally ask if you would go and review that and just look at the road for me, please. I'd really appreciate it, and just see, just go down Cooper Street. I don't know his address. I know you said it.
It's 800 block, it's entire Route 19, it's not just.
Okay, the 800 block of Cooper Street, and just go and take a look. If you could have somebody do that, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Hussein.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue all across the city, really. We've gotten complaints from Northrop, from Cooper, from Washington. I mean, the list goes on and on. I appreciate that we're fixing the deficiencies in our contract that we didn't understand were there, in terms of not having the limits in terms of the maximum and minimum amounts of time between the stone and then the final seal. But I think, just to piggyback on some of Councilman Jackson's comments or questions, I cannot believe that there's not some clawback for the fact that final product is not what the city contracted for. The reality is, you talked about large swaths of roads not having the stone that they're supposed to have because an application wasn't put on appropriately. And that's what we're experiencing. So I really struggle that those contracts would be closed out by our engineers without them going out and saying, this is absolutely not up to snuff.
I mean, they have not been closed out yet. So
Okay.
there's some work especially on the far north side where there are a couple roads that they have to go back and do something. So we can look, if there is actually a performance standard in there, then we can go back and look at what's in writing. But again, if it's not in writing, then contractually, I think it's tough to enforce, and we can work with the city attorney's office on that to see if there are other provisions.
I would just look at those things very critically before,
Yep.
before closing those out. The other thing is, you did mention Miller Road. And so we do have the issue with the manhole covers and the fact that the road is not flush. And so I know they're going to come back before that's
Correct.
closed out and fix
Correct.
that. Has there been any discussion with regards to that kind of mound of asphalt that's been put in front of North School? We've gotten a lot of complaints about that as well.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at that also, and whether we would try and have the contractor do it, our own staff do that. And essentially, the reason for that is they paved the side street first and then matched the Miller Road grade up to that. And it is definitely, I mean, I've driven it, and it's noticeable. Is it unsafe? I don't think it's unsafe, but it's not necessarily the final product that we would want for something like that. So we will address it. I just don't know whether it will be within the contract or it will be with our own forces to mill off a section and make those grades a little better.
Okay. And then lastly, I really appreciate this construction map, and frankly, I think we've gotten a lot of projects done, and that's exciting. You talked to us a little bit about, I don't know, maybe it's the science behind it or the politics behind it. How do you determine, outside of, as an example, state-funded projects, how do you determine which road projects get funded in any construction season?
So obviously with CSO, that's a whole nother thing. We're mandated to do things. We have a schedule for that. With our major street projects that have federal funding, we look at candidate projects around the city. We have a whole list based on the condition of the road, whether there's sewer or water main work or something else that has to go on with that. And we really just look to fit those into the budget we have. Generally, we'll have about $1.5 million federal dollars each year through Tri-County Regional Planning, and so we'll try and figure out how to make that work. We try and pick larger projects simply because the extra steps going through a project with MDOT makes it such that with small projects, it's really not cost effective because we have to have full-time inspection out there. We have to go through the MDOT bidding process, and in general, we get higher prices going through MDOT and having them bid it versus having us do it ourselves. So we'll start to do the smaller projects with our funding, and with the federal funding, we'll do the larger projects.
And I'm curious as to how our PACER rating system and maybe even citizen complaints, do those come into play at all?
They do, but only to the fact that the more complaints we have and we go out there, then we look at how cost effective it is to keep going and filling potholes versus doing a fix on the road. And you may be getting to, like, do we look at a geographic distribution or anything? And we don't necessarily. We try and spread different projects around, but we're not going to take a specific project and necessarily say we need to touch all 4 wards. So certain projects like these maintenance type of projects, preventative maintenance projects, depending on the PACER rating, you can't do those. I mean, if the road has failed, you're not going to do it out there. So we have a limited number of projects that we can do, or roads that are candidates for certain type of fixes. So since those are the most cost-effective solutions, we will do as many of those as we can for the roads that meet those criteria. And then we start to look at projects that are more long-term fixes. And with those, we try and either, if the Board of Water and Light is doing a project, a water main project, we will partner with them on that. Or if we need to do a sewer project, we will do that at the same time. Otherwise, we try and avoid projects that have either sewer issues or water main issues, so we get as many miles as possible on the roadside. So it's not an exact science. I mean, there's an approach we take. But we have probably a dozen candidate projects, and we may pick 3 or 4 of them. So any input you want to give, that we can take that, certainly. And it's just a bunch of engineers trying to figure out what we think makes sense with both, possibly also Consumers Energy if they're doing a project in the area, but any other things we have coming up. The other thing we look at is with CSO, we don't want to have a project that, say, is going to last 15 years on the road if we're going to be in there 10 years for CSO. So we might do a short-term fix knowing that the road is in poor shape now and CSO is coming along in whatever that time period is, so try and have that fix so that it matches kind of the time frame until we're in doing something major, which again, I guess I'll kind of go into a little bit into 23. You know, if you still have 22 questions, we can do that. But that is why in 2016, we did 1 inch of asphalt on Michigan Avenue, thinking that BRT was going to be coming along at some point in time. We all know that that has not happened, and that road has lasted a lot longer than we thought it would, but that's why we didn't do any kind of significant project on Michigan Avenue at that point in time, because we thought there was going to be a major investment on that corridor with another project.
Sure, and so you kind of hit on one of my issues in terms of geographic distribution. I mean, if you look at the map, and this isn't, I mean, this is kind of a historical issue, frankly, that precedes, I think, even your time. But if you look, you know, particularly out of the street, outside of the street demonstration program that we have going on in Leno, there's almost no dollars that have been plunked down in Southwest Lansing in terms of roads. But you have quite a bit in the fourth, quite a bit in the first, and then a little bit in the second. So it feels like South Lansing, again, outside of the CSO, continues to be underfunded. Beyond that, if you look at historically, if you look at census tracts and you look at a median household income, I think what you also see is that you have economically depressed areas that have also been disproportionately underfunded. And so I've struggled with that as well, and that's why I continue to ask the question about the citizens' complaints. And although that might not be the determining factor, it does sound like where you have those areas where you have neighborhood associations and you have some privilege built in within, you know, in terms of people know how to use the government's infrastructure to onboard complaints and things like that, it does seem like they get a little bit more attention from the city. And so we actually have a public service board for several years now, and we've adopted this as part of our budget policies, but our priorities has actually asked us to consider economically depressed areas and really getting in there, studying and then plunking money down in the infrastructure, because that's a huge, huge impact on a number of things. As a matter of fact, that's what we're studying with regards to the street demonstration program at Leno. What does it do with regards to property values? What does it do with regards to public safety? What does it do with regards to, and we know it has an impact on all of those. We just want to be able to, you know, as an example, be able to go to the state and actually show that scientifically. So I think it's critical that we're not just, and I appreciate that you're saying it is cerebral, but that we're not just, you know, appeasing people and plunking money down maybe where we've plunked money down in the last 10, 15, 20 years, but we're really getting out there and fixing the infrastructure really across the city. And then again, taking a look at some of these areas that maybe have not done a great job or maybe just don't know how to advocate for themselves. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Garza.
Thank you, Council President. And I'm looking through this, and I appreciate this. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how come Schaefer Road was $2 million when there's no curb and gutter, same application process as, and almost the same length as Wabash, and Wabash is $90,000.
So with a lot of these, and it may not say it with this specific one, but that was the entire contract for multiple streets. So we didn't necessarily split them up by street. So I think we have some contracts that there's, you know, one for the Alpha Devonshire area. All those streets, and each street will say $3.2 million, but that was the entire contract for that. So with this, if it would help, we can go back and just proportion it by length of that total contract amount. It won't be exact because, you know, depending on what the treatment was, it's not necessarily by foot or by mile, but it would give you an idea of what that cost is per street. Where some of these, I believe there were a couple there that you referenced that actually had a different treatment at the end. They had a microsurface treatment, and they had, I think one was 90 and one was 85,000, but they got the same base treatment. This was just a kind of another trial we looked to see, because some people were saying that just the chip and fog was a very rough surface afterwards, and they couldn't go out and, you know, rollerblade or play basketball or whatever they did in the street. And so there were a couple that we added something additional on to see how that might work and how cost effective that was. So the number on each specific line is not necessarily that street, because I believe all the CSO streets, they all say $18.1 million. So we can definitely break this down so that it's kind of on a, you know, per foot basis, proportioned out. So you'll see how much we spent on each street.
Okay, yeah, because I'm seeing that you have a separate price for Northrop, which touches Schaefer. You have a separate price on Miller, which has curb and gutter, the storm and sewer, sorry. And Schaefer's more than twice as much as Miller.
Yeah, I think again, that's probably the entire project amount. So Miller was a separate project. Miller was bid out separately, so we have that actual amount. Waverly was separate, Penn was separate, but some of these treatments that had multiple streets, they would have just one cost in here for the entire project. But we can definitely go and look at that, and if there's a reason Schaefer was more, I can let you know. There may be something else out there, but I think with a lot of these, if they're multiple streets, they had the total project cost for that project for all the streets is listed multiple times. So if you went and added all this up, you'd probably get a couple $100 million. But that could be definitely confusing, so we'll go and, separate that out by street, which should be an estimate. It won't be exact because we didn't track the cost by street. But
All right, well, I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
I think that'd be helpful. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thanks, Andy, for being here. You talked about, my question is about the contract not kind of having some specifications. What is the process in which we contract with people, and then how do we prevent this challenge going forward with any new contracts?
So what we do normally, if we have a new type of work we're putting out, we will get something from somewhere else. I believe we may have gotten this one from Grand Rapids or somewhere in that area. We'll just use theirs the first time through, and as we are figuring things out, then we will modify it as necessary to address concerns we have out there. I mean, we had a project years ago on Jolly Road, west of Aurelius, that the contractor came out, did some work, decided to leave for a month or so, and we had nothing in there other than the total completion date at that point in time that we could go back to say, you're not doing what you're supposed to. We have since put it in there that we have an entire time frame or a window that they can do the work, but it says that once they've started the work, they have to work continuously until it's done. So that is something, that we went back and changed the specification based on an issue we had. And so we would do the same thing with this to prevent that long period of time. Not necessarily that they can't do it over 3 or 4 months, but once they start a specific street or multiple streets, they have to follow that in sequence in whatever time frame we put in there. And if they don't, then we have liquidated damages that are put in there to address any type of extra costs we might have for mainly inspection. And if there are performance issues, then we would have some way to go and address that with the contractor. Because if they did not conform to the specifications, then we do have provisions in there.
Okay, thank you. So if you use, for example, a contract with Grand Rapids, look at multiple other cities for framework, and then also do you go to that city and say, what challenges did you have when you, implemented that contract? Did they have any challenges where they could add their foresight before we move forward with something that they started with? Because it sounds like while you guys are doing your due diligence, this has happened before, and it's a kind of reactive approach, and then we end up with challenges that we can't hold anybody accountable to.
I think this is the first time we've had one that affected performance. That the project I mentioned on Jolly, it didn't affect anything performance-wise on the road or the contract or the cost. It was just for the fact that we had traffic control out there for weeks with nothing going on. So from a PR perspective, it didn't look good, but the final product was exactly what we expected. In this case, yes, the way the contractor performed the work affected or could have affected, the long-term durability of the project. And that's why, at least on the federal projects, for example, Michigan Avenue now, based on the dollar amount that is, we will actually have to have a warranty on the pavement for that, which is, specified by the state that they have the warranty there. The reason we don't do something like that for our projects is, in general, warranty is like insurance, and you're going to pay for it. So if the contractor, thinks it's going to cost them a little more, they're going to charge you that extra. So in general, we have a 12-month performance, on all of our projects. Sidewalks are a little different. Sidewalk is 3 years on that, and that's something that if we continue to have issues, even if we change our specifications, we can look at something else that we put in there, some other provisions, and we'll probably reach out to other folks that are using this a little more to see if they've had, any other challenges. But we do, when we get the original specification, we do reach out to the agency that's doing it to say, hey, can you give us any pointers on what's worked and what hasn't?
Okay, thank you so much. And lastly, to Council Member Hussein's point about kind of the science behind, do you guys have maybe public settings where people can put input where they feel some of the projects, that they're really concerned about in the community? And then also, is there somewhere that you provide the overall justification of this is what we're planning this year and these are the reasons why? So that way it can be a collaborative community effort.
But I don't think we've done that historically. We can say why we pick, certain projects. But again, I'm not sure, and maybe you would like to have the community pick projects, but we would at least put out kind of the type of projects and the reason for them. I mean, there's, just because a project, again, going to like the worst streets, if we did worst streets first and reconstructed all of our streets, we would probably get maybe a quarter of the miles that we do now, and then the ones that are in good shape are going to be in poor shape. And so from an asset management approach, that is not the approach we want to take, because long-term, that means our roads will be getting worse. And for the first year in a long time, they've ticked up just a little bit now, and we want to continue that trend. But certainly, as far as people expressing their opinions of what matters to them and us explaining why we're doing certain things, that's something that I think we're definitely open to doing.
Thank you so much.
All right, Councilmember Hussein.
Yeah, most of my follow-up questions were actually just asked and answered, so I appreciate that. Mr. Shuck did say something at the podium that had me thinking, though. If we had somebody that pretty much did the contractors of the city's work and they picked up this loose gravel, what's the appropriate way to dispose of it? I think he talked about some 15 gallons of gravel that he picked up.
If it's in a specific location, I mean, we could probably make arrangements to pick it up.
So they should call O&M?
Yeah, that'd be the best way.
Okay. And then beyond that, I did ask folks to reach out with regard to Southwest Lansing roads and projects. And Andy, we continue to hear about Waverly Miller between Waverly and Pleasant Grove. Continue to hear about Pleasant Grove between Mount Hope and West Holmes, as you know. In the Churchill neighborhood, we hear quite a bit about Connors. Connors is a huge source of concern for those folks over there. And then in Colonial Cooperative, pretty much the entirety of Bernard. So there are, and that's obviously just the tip of the iceberg, but those are some of the ones that we hear about the most often. So hoping that you guys have something in the works for maybe not this construction season, but maybe an upcoming construction season over the next 2-3 years. But those are sorely needed. Thank you.
Yeah, and those, I know, Pleasant Grove specifically, that is one of the next, we're scoping that project now. That does not say that we're going to do it next year or in 2024. But once we scope those major street projects, those are the next ones we do. Local streets are more hit and miss. We kind of wait until the winter and see which one's completely blown apart. And again, if the Colonial Cooperatives, if that also needs water main and sewer and everything else, it's a much bigger project, so it might take longer. But at a minimum, for those that people would bring up, we can say, okay, we've heard you. This is the reason this is not higher on our priority list because of X, Y, and Z. And so we can definitely, at least give you the rationale.
And that takes us to Councilmember Koss, and then I have a couple questions, and then we'll move on to the next.
Thank you, Council President. So I wanted to ask, with this chip and seal, what is the lifespan for something like that?
It depends on the volume of the street. Higher volume maybe doesn't last quite as long. But if you're familiar, obviously as you are, with the First Ward, wood was done a number of years ago by Ingham County Road Department, and that's lasting pretty well, other than there's some bare spots where there's not a lot of, you can see basically the emulsion now near the top of the hill there. But we're expecting 5 to 8 years.
Okay. Because, my concern with this is these streets that are listed, I went down them earlier once they were done, and gravel was already starting to go into the gutter. And now we are to the point where I drove around this weekend on these roads, and potholes are starting to reform, cracks, spots that are completely missing everything. Mr. Shook's road, I've seen the video on. His road is actually, I think, in worse shape in some regards than it was before. So, my concern is that this is not lasting, and it's not just an isolated incident, but multiple roads that are not lasting at all. So that's a concern for me. I realize that that's a cost-effective measure, but it doesn't seem like the means are there for longevity on this stuff. The other thing I wanted to know is, what is the turnaround time on pothole filling right now?
Right now, it should be 95% of them within 24 to 48 hours, depending on when they were put in and whether it's over the weekend or not.
Okay. As you know, I've contacted you about Sheldon.
Yep.
And it is like, a test track for your vehicle when you drive through there, hitting those giant bumps. And I turned it in 3 months ago, so I just want to make sure that citizens that are using Lansing Connect are getting responses, or that they're getting through to you. And I don't know if there's an issue there.
So we checked this morning on Sheldon, and the last thing we had in our system was from August, and everything else was closed out. So if you had a specific, number on that, we could look back into it, but we did put the one you sent me.
I do. I sent you both of them that are in there.
Okay.
So if you want to check that
Oh,
out.
okay, I'll look at it.
Absolutely. Appreciate it very much.
Okay.
And then Andy, just a couple of questions that I have for you. One, dealing with Pennsylvania, I know Councilmember Garza and myself received a number of emails and that from constituents about, the delay in getting that done, and now it's bled over into 2023. Can you tell us what the holdup was and why? And then if you could also, there's been a number of questions on the reconfiguration. Is that going to go the length of it? And could you address that as well?
Certainly. So the project, as far as initial timing, and I'm sure you know this has water main too.
Right.
Part of it, the contract was done, so it went through MDOT, and there were some issues trying to get approval for the contractor that was doing the water main that the Board of Water and Light had some issues with years ago. So it started a little later. Because of that, there were also issues with getting pipe ordered. So there were supply chain issues with water main, so that took longer. And then the only other thing is once they got to the concrete work, there's a cement shortage. So there was a limit to the amount of concrete they could get at any point in time. And so that is the reason why kind of at the end of the season, that curb and gutter and sidewalk did not go in. So as far as the configuration that's out there now, that is temporary. The reason there's one lane is we didn't want people driving on the edge of the paved area and going off it because there's no curb and gutter. So we striped it as a single lane kind of in the middle of that paved section, but it will go back to 2 lanes each direction when the project is done next year.
Okay. And then lastly, just as a suggestion, where you have Miller and that asphalt, why don't you put up a sign that says speed bump?
Technically, it's not a speed bump.
I know
So-
that, but, I mean,
We can look and see, as far as provisions, we could put up a bump sign.
Okay.
That is fine, but yeah.
all right. Okay, with that, I think that does it, and we want to thank you for coming in. And that takes us to our next presentation, which is the Mayor's American Rescue Plan Act Community Grant Funding. And I believe that the Chief of Staff is going to handle that for us.
We're going to take a team approach, but
Okay.
yes, I'll start. Well, first of all, City Council, thank you for bringing this item. And secondly, also, I'd like to report that we received a great response for the small amount of dollars, but still, we did get a great response. And before I give you a little bit of information as to the process itself, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the number of applications that we received and when we started this project. As you know, when the Finance Committee went out and asked for applications, we received a total of 67 applications. And this was for a total of almost $18 million in all, when you look at the 67 applications that came in. Or to be more exact, it was $17,829,950.70 to be precise, in terms of the applicants that, or the amount of funds that were requested for the 1.9 million. As you know, through ARPA, The intent of the ARPA funds is to help us provide support to state, territorial, local, and tribal governments in responding to our economic and public health impacts of COVID-19, and of course also in our efforts to contain impacts on our community, our residents, and our businesses. And that's so important. After all that, on November the 21st, November 21st, 2022, the ARPA committee convened and we took a look at every single one of these 67 applications that were submitted for consideration for the $1.9 million. Of the 67 applications, we did recommend a total of 27. As far as the process itself, the ARPA committee's prime directive was to review and recommend qualifying applications and to fund within the amount requested. When reviewing,
I hate to interrupt you,
Sure.
but could you give us a definition of qualifying?
and I will in just a
Okay,
second,
thank
that
you.
comes next. So when reviewing these applications, the committee members agreed to the following protocols. And when I mean protocols, these are some of the rules that we asked besides the application itself, because the application asks for specific information and things of that nature. But the committee ourselves, when we looked at this, we made sure that the request complied with the ARPA regulations themselves, that the request fell under an ARPA usage category code, and that we used the matrix that I worked on as a guide when we evaluated these applications. I believe we did provide you with a copy of the matrix, and these are some of the things that we looked at when we evaluated these applications. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we talked about the COVID impact that the application would have. We asked for their financial background and information. We asked also for a project description of the application. We looked at economic impact. We also looked at the completion of the application. We looked to see the type of public health emergency it had. We also asked if it was self-sustaining. If possible, we also asked them to identify some type of performance measures, and then also the type of organization that was requesting for the application. And obviously the key factor when we looked at the organization was to make sure that they provided service to the citizens of Lansing. A copy, as you know, of the full application has been provided to you, and also a copy of the matrix. To date, I'm proud to say that we have informed all of the applicants, both those that received the funds and those that did not. The one good thing about this, well, there's many good things when we took a look at this application, but whenever an applicant was not or did not meet the qualifications, or we weren't able to fund them because they weren't in compliance with ARPA, we did give them some recommendations as to other potential funding that they may qualify. Our finance department will be working with our qualified applicants to complete an agreement with us. And in this agreement or contract, we're going to be identifying how the funds are going to be used. We're going to explain how these funds will be distributed. And we're also going to make sure that they comply with the federal reporting requirements that are needed. And that's going to be very, very key. And again, there are many specifics. It depends on all kinds of things. But we do have with us an individual, and that is Daphne Whitfield. She is our ARPA coordinator, and she'll be working, and she has been working with these contracts to make sure that we provide them with assistance, that we help them in any of their questions, and also to provide some guidance and information. So overall, we did stay within the $1.9 million that was allocated to us. I think we went over by just a couple $100, but not by much. But overall, I'm very pleased. We have been receiving good response from the individuals that did receive the funds, and even those that for whatever reason were not allocated funds, we were able to assist them in other ways. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Do we have any questions from council members?
Go ahead.
I think one of the things I'm looking for is if we could have copies of your matrix that you did on each individual one so that we could understand how you did your scoring, we would appreciate that.
Well, the matrix itself.
I have that.
Okay,
But
so-
I'm talking about, let's just say ABC Community Service, XYZ Planning, you know, I would like to see for the 67 of them, your results.
Okay, I will
Okay.
address this matter.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
So you would
Councilmember?
actually like to see the scores of each?
Yes.
applicant? Yeah, I would love to see those as well. And then with regards to the feedback, so you said that feedback to each organization that was not funded, so all 40 organizations that were not funded was
Correct.
tailored feedback?
Yes.
So okay, because that's not what, just so you know, that's not what we're hearing. What we're hearing is that some of these organizations that weren't funded, they did not know why they weren't funded, they didn't know what their final scores were, and they were not given, you know, any of the type of feedback that you're talking about in terms of alternate sources of funding and the like to exhaust, they're saying they didn't receive that.
May I just clarify something? This is very
Please do.
important. The matrix is just one part of the evaluation. So a person could have received maybe not as high a score on the matrix, but they could have, when we looked at the other items, as I mentioned, their compliance with the ARPA regulations, whether or not they were able to qualify under a specific code, those were also some things that we took into consideration besides their rating. And of course, we made sure that they served the citizens of Lansing, and if they didn't, obviously this was something that we took, you know, very, very much in terms of consideration. So I'm going to turn it over to Daphne so she can explain a little bit about the discussions we've had with the county.
So, good evening, everyone. I was not a part of the review process at all. And so the letters and things that were sent out, I am now doing follow-up with those that received the ARPA funding and those that did not receive. And I have received very, very good feedback because when this whole process started and we received the applications from everyone, I had to reach out to many of the people that put applications in because they did not have all of the parts that were necessary. So in having to talk to them, I was very intentional in letting them know that no matter how things play out, you'll be able to give me a call back so that we can make sure, more than anything, because you're doing incredible work, that we can kind of guide you as to where there are other possible funds that are available. We knew going in, the ask was incredible. And we have this $1.9 million and we have this $18 million of people that are asking, and all of their work to me is very important. And so knowing that we had this $1.9 million that was going to be allotted when the decisions were made, my focus has shifted now to these individuals that did not get. And I made it a point of, when meeting with Jane and Desiree and the staff and everything, and letting them know, hey, I'd really like to create an opportunity to let them know that they're just as important, and that there is monies that is available not only in the city, state, but in a national foundations. There's money available for the work that you do here in the city, just to expand and help them to build capacity and sustainability. And so that is what is being focused on right now. I do apologize that they have not been reached yet, but the letters and everything, as I understand it, they just were receiving them. Everybody's receiving them now. But I personally will be reaching out to them to let them know. And I've talked to, I think today is Monday, and most people started receiving the letters last week. I think I talked to maybe 8 to 10 people today, and it was kind of like split down the middle. Some received, some didn't. And they were excited, because my thing is that we want you to be supported. We want you to be able to hit that specific demographic that you're working with here in the city to serve them and get them what they're in need of. And so my goal is to make sure that that happens now as we work out these final details with getting what's required for the distribution to occur for the people that got the money. it's also at the same time to make sure that we give information, that we give resources, and a personal touch to those that didn't, so they can get the money and continue the work that's just important. That's my and the staff's primary focus is to let them know that we got them still too.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, truly, when I look at these applicants and I look at the programs that they wanted to be funded, I don't see a program or an applicant that doesn't have value. And so I really appreciate the fact that you guys are working to empower them,
Yeah.
so that they can potentially exhaust other avenues to receive funding. So that
Exactly.
They but then the other piece is too, when we've had other programs in the past, and it sounds like we're finally doing it right. We've had other programs in the past where people haven't gotten feedback, and because they haven't received feedback, they simply have given up, in terms of other rounds of applications with the city in terms of funding, kind of threw their hands in the air because it took them a lot of time. They don't necessarily have the technical support that maybe other groups do. And so you don't want to see that either. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You want to give them hope, and let them know that it matters. So that's what we're doing, not trying to do, that's what we're going to do.
Okay, I have Councilmember Jackson, then Councilmember Brown.
Thank you. It kind of goes to one of Adam's points about all of the valuable nonprofits that's on here.
Of course.
But I am looking through, and I did see one that, I have questions about. Riverwalk Theater, $20,000. They asked for $23,000, and it reads revenue replacement and capital upgrades. And I was just kind of, if you can, kind of explain how that got in there amongst all the others, with even the ones that weren't included. I just don't know. It's a theater. They host shows and plays. And of course, like a lot of places, I'm sure they need capital improvements, probably before the pandemic as well. I just wonder how that happened.
So you have, and I'm going to read it to you straight from ARPA. You have 4 usage areas. One is support public health expenditures. One is replace lost revenue. You have premium pay for essential workers, and then you have infrastructure. That's water, sewer, broadband, just infrastructure. Riverwalk lost revenue. They lost revenue. I think that's the thing that, now mind you, I wasn't a part of this review process, but looking at it, I know these applications inside out. When you have a person that puts an application in and it's duly stated, they lost the revenue. I mean, I can think of another one without being specific that lost revenue as well, and lost the whole source of their income for their nonprofit that they've had for over 40 years. When they were able to show that in their financials that money was lost for them, that met the requirement for the ARPA funding.
With that,
And then there's, like she said, there's other things that they probably took into consideration as well.
Yes.
But
it is a nonprofit entity, and they do provide service to our community, and it is specific to our city. So they do provide many programs that will assist our community in so many other ways. So again, it was looking at all these applications, which we did go through every single one of them. We had to make some tough decisions, and I believe that the recommendations we made were good, and that they complied within the ARPA regulations. That was the number one thing, to make sure that they met ARPA regulations.
I might not answer your question, but
I guess I just wasn't aware of all of the community things that the Riverwalk Theater does, especially when I'm looking at other places like even the Village. I mean, I know about that and I see what they got.
It depends on what they asked for, and it may just not qualify for ARPA. Again, I don't know specifically on that application unless you recall that one, but because there's 67 of them. But I'd be happy to go back and take a look at it. I can tell you, Council, that for the most part, we did fund many, if not all, of the applications that met the ARPA requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you all for being here. Always good to see you. You guys made a statement when Councilwoman Wood was asking a question about the matrix, that what we see in our packet here, I guess the scorecard, was not the only determining factor.
Correct.
So I think what she was asking was, what are all of the factors in what you guys were looking at? So if there were 4 different areas, 1 being the scorecard, 2 being eligibility, 3 and 4, where did the people score, so that way, transparently everyone can see this is why this organization was funded versus another, and so on and so forth. So really looking at the full picture of how you all looked at the scoring process and who was selected in the funding amount. And Ms. Whitfield said that she wasn't a part of that process. So just trying to put all the pieces together in one place so we have a greater understanding, and of course the people in the community and the agencies. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand. Again, the ARPA committee members, when we all met together to evaluate the applications, as I stated earlier, there were many things that we looked at, obviously, but the key factors were whether or not they complied with the ARPA regulations. As I said earlier, that was number 1. Whoever we gave these dollars for, we recommended that these funds be allocated to that. Number 1, they had to meet the ARPA regulations, and that's going to be very key, especially when we go back and develop the contracts with them and make sure that they provide the proper information, reporting information to us. So that's going to be so important to us. The other thing that we did, and we went a little bit further, is we made sure that they fell under a specific usage category code. So we went through each of them and we went back to make sure, and I think that has already been described in terms of what are some of those categories. Did they comply? Did they meet?
So I think with, like, for example, the compliance with ARPA, let's say there's the 60 organizations, and let's say you said, I think 20-something were eligible, and so therefore it would leave about 40 that were not. So I think what we're asking for is, okay, the 40 that were not eligible, you deemed them not eligible. Why were they not eligible? Is that an example?
There are many reasons. Again, I'd have to go
I'm
back
saying
and.
as far as what I think Councilwoman is asking.
Well, if they didn't meet the ARPA regulation requirements, then that's number 1, depending on their request. So if they did not meet that requirement, then we did not consider them. I mean, there was one that asked for, I believe, 8 or 9 million. How big was that? And we just couldn't fund. We just weren't able to fund that one. And again, we did take a look at in terms of the matrix, and the matrix goes into, and I went through each of those categories. So we looked at a lot of things to make sure that these organizations provided us with the information that we felt was necessary in order to help us evaluate them properly.
I understand, excuse me, Councilmember Jeffries. Councilmember Brown, I understand what you're saying, but I think, again, it's no different than when we're looking at, let's say, hiring an employee. We have the tests that we take, we have the interview process, we have, and all of those are scored and come together to make the final determination. We're just asking for that from you as well. If there are 5 different things that you're looking at, including, the metric on that, then fine. If you could give us those in some type of spreadsheet, that would be wonderful. We're not asking you to do it tonight. We're asking you to, to put that information together and get it to us.
So, Council, one thing that eliminated a lot of people is the very definition of ARPA. ARPA is one.
And that would be fine.
Okay.
In it, let's say we're saying again.
Okay.
1, 2, 3 community funding. It didn't meet, it could be a yes or no. It didn't meet the ARPA requirements, and then the next thing, so that we're looking at it, the public's able to look at it. That's what we're asking for.
Okay, I think I can do that. I'm not 100% sure, but I can tell you that each of the applications that we recommended met the top 3 items that we stated to you in terms of, we didn't give a specific number or value to it. We just simply checked to make sure that they met the ARPA regulations. We checked to make sure that they, again, I know I'm repeating myself.
Yeah,
But-
I get that.
Okay.
We're looking for an overall so that we can just look at it and understand it. So if you could do that, that'd be great. Are there, Councilmember Hussein?
Yeah, just one additional item. I guess I'm curious as well. When you had to decide to pare down, and so you look at some of these groups such as, you look at Habitat for Humanity, you look at Crystal Ray, you look at, I believe, Carefree Medical, and they were fully funded in terms of their request. And then some were pared down, and I think the village was discussed earlier. I think they requested some 290,000, and they got 10,000. How did you decide on? I mean, I know it wasn't just an arbitrary decision. Okay, we're going to pare it down to 10,000. How did you decide on those final amounts? Was it that there was maybe one program with several that qualified? Was it that they had other revenue streams that you felt could backfill? Or, I mean, how'd you determine that?
Exactly. So sometimes an organization would submit a request, and they would, because they had to break down for us, how much those funds were, what were they for. And so again, looking back at the ARPA regulations, we made sure that they qualified. Some of the things that they asked for did not qualify. But we made sure that's one of the reasons, we did not give them all the funds. So that's how we evaluated that.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense? I see some questions. So again, one more time, an organization may have asked for, let's say, 10,000, and we only gave them 5. That was because the one item met the ARPA regulation, so we gave them the 5.
Okay, I have Councilmember Garza, then Councilmember Brown, and then we're going to move on to our next item.
Okay, thank you, Council President. So I think you just answered it, but I just want to be clear for the public. So I was assuming if they didn't meet all the different aspects of the ARPA, they were just excluded. But you're saying is if they met one of them and they didn't meet the other 3, they still were granted money. Okay.
Yes, correct. That's correct. If we saw that there was a portion of their application that met the requirements, then yes. And of course, we have limited dollars. They're asking, almost for $18 million, and we have 1.9 million. So again, we made sure that we distributed the monies fairly, and that we, as I stated earlier, for the most part, the majority of the applicants that we recommended, met those requirements, and we did fund. City Council, one last thing. We really didn't have to do much paring down. When we first sat down, each of us, and we evaluated each of the programs, we just took them and we evaluated them. We didn't even consider, did we have enough dollars? Did we, is there something that we're missing or whatever? When we looked at all the items that I've just mentioned to you, we just simply took them straight on. And in the end, there was very little paring that we had to do as it relates to dollars, because again, there were many that just simply did not meet the ARPA regulations. There was some that did not provide funds specifically here to our city. There were a few, although we did not disqualify them if they were not here in our city. The other qualifying factor was, as I stated earlier, that they served the citizens of our community. There are 3 organizations, I believe, that we recommended for funding that are not specifically here in Lansing, but they do provide specific services to our community, and we're very familiar with them. And just to give you an example, we did fund, as an outside, was the food, the Greater Lansing Food organization. Yes, they may not be located here in our community, but we know specifically, and we've worked with them in the past, and their program was such that we know that they're going to be allocating, the use of those funds will be strictly here in the city of Lansing.
Councilmember Brown, and then as I said, we have 2 other items before we go into closed session.
Thank you, Council President. Yeah, so exactly, Councilman Garza just said, that you guys were able to, if there's 3 items and then 1 item was eligible, you guys were funding that, and that's where you're seeing a reflection. For example, if they asked for 200,000, but they received 40, it was for that specific line item. I think that's part of what we're requesting, so the public knows and is able to see that, these are the justifications, so everything is transparent you know, this is our justification why this group was funded at this dollar amount. This is what they were not eligible for. This is what they were, as well as their scoring and all of the matrix that you all use. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to move on. The next item that we have before us is the appointment of Eric Sudal. If I'm not saying that right, I apologize, for an at-large member for the Lansing Entertainment and Public Facilities Authority. Mr. Sudal, are you here? If you would come up to the table here in front, and if you would make sure, once you sit down, make sure the green light is on the mic. You'll have to push it to make sure that the green light, okay, good. We have your application in front of us, and normally what we do at this time is ask the applicant to give us a little bit of history about themselves and why they believe that they would like to sit on this board. So if you would please give us a little bit of information about yourself.
Thank you. Again, my name is Eric Sudal. I'm the general manager of the East Lansing Marriott. I've been at the Marriott for about 28 years. I've been in hospitality for a little more than between 30 and 35 years altogether. I've been appointed by the Greater Lansing Convention and Visitors Bureau's Board of Directors to serve on the LEFA board. So I was elected to serve as one of our 2 seats on LEFA. I think I've been committed to hospitality in the region, and I think I have an interest in hopefully serving on LEFA as well.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for him? I see none. Vice President Garza, would you like to make a motion?
Thank you. Yes, I would move the resolution, appointment of Eric Sudal, at-large member, Lansing Entertainment and Public Facilities Authority Board of Commissioners, term to expire 6/30 of 2025.
All right, we have a motion before us. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. If you would like to stay around, you can be sworn in this evening at the beginning of our council meeting. We do have one other item, and then we have a closed session, so it should be shortly after 7 when we get back out. If you don't want to stay around because you were here at 5:30, you're more than welcome to get sworn in by the clerk in the clerk's office on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, that takes us to the next item that we have. This is a resolution for to add 2 outside counsel firms to our outside counsel list. The first is under Act 314, the Employees Retirement System, as well as the Police and Fire Retirement System, have the ability to have a law firm representing the boards. The boards have been paying for this out of the pension fund. We also then have another law firm that has been engaged for collection for debts that are owed to the city for the fire and EMS system. So, Vice President Garza.
Okay, with that, I would move the resolution for the outside legal counsel, Board of Trustees of the City of Lansing Employee Retirement System, and the City of Lansing Police and Fire Retirement System.
Do we have any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. At this time, we are going to go into closed session. We need a motion.
All right. Thank you, Council President. So pursuant to MCL 15.268 of the Opens Meeting Act, I hereby move the recess into closed session to consult with the city attorney to consider material exempt from the discussion or disclosure by state statute, specifically to discuss a written legal opinion from the city attorney provided under attorney-client privilege and attorney work product, and which is also exempt from the disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act pursuant to MCL 15.243. We are also allowing Executive Director Jane DeSessa into closed session with us as well.
This is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Garza,
Yes.
Councilmember Hussein,
Yes.
Councilmember Spatafor, Councilmember Spitzley, Councilmember Jackson, Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Cost.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-1.
Thank you. We are going into closed session, and hopefully we'll be out close to 7. Thank you. Call back to order the Committee of the Whole. We will stand adjourned, and we will start our council meeting in 5 minutes. Thank you.